Hello again, welcome back to our latest webcast. We're on project management today. Now, some of you might know that we've been running a series of project management articles, and a lot of you have been reading them and commenting on them, so thanks very much for that. So today we're getting deeper into the subject, and so we're looking at the Project Management Survival Guide. Projects are getting a bit more complicated now, and is our project management keeping up with it? And we've got a cast of thousands today to tell you about. Well, a cast of 4 anyway. And between those, between us in the studio, there is 80 years of project management experience. Now, I account for none of it whatsoever, so you don't really need to know from me. But the other people in the studio, you do need to listen to what they're saying. So, first of all, from Microsoft at the far end, Bob Walker. Bob, welcome to the studio.
Good day.
Now, Bob, because you've got so much project management experience, what's your biggest disaster?
The biggest disaster was finding, or biggest challenge I would say, was finding we had a £20 million project in the portfolio we didn't know about.
OK, if you've got a project disaster that's bigger than that, please let us know. That was quite significant, actually. Now, next to Bob, we're very pleased to have Terry Dewhurst here from lastminute.com. Terry, welcome.
Hello there.
Now, Terry, you've been doing this job a long time, and lastminute.com, I guess you've got quite a few projects going. How many have you got going at the moment?
In technology, which is where I work, we've got probably just over 130 projects on the go at the moment in our portfolio, and we're trying to be successful at those.
So you've got 130-odd projects going, and you work for a very busy internet site, which does things to a strict deadline at the very last minute. So the other question is, are you crazy?
Yes, we are crazy, and historically, we haven't been very successful. So what we're trying to do, and what might be important to your viewers, is we're trying to make things better. We're trying to make things better for the project management community, and we're trying to make things better for the business as well. So hopefully that's going to come to fruition.
Oh, so, I mean, we're talking a little bit about the disasters at the moment. We'll talk it up a little bit later on the. Now, Dale, I'll make for Freeform Dynamics. Dale, you're here as well. You come from project management background as well. Have you really stuffed it up in the past as well?
Well, I'd rather talk about some stuff-ups I've seen rather than stuff that I've done, Tim. But,
that's better, yeah. Blame other people.
Yeah. So, no, I mean, there's some interesting things that come across of it. Apart from systems integrators being in the dock for non-delivery, which was an interesting one when I was involved in ERP. Just taking something out of scope of a big project that looked pretty trivial, but just meant that the system that was supposed to be replacing had to be kept running for another 6 months at a massive cost. Yeah. So stuff like that, just unexpected.
These are the, this is the day-to-day, and some of these things we're going to get into in a lot more detail, and hopefully this will represent some of the problems that you've come up against, and like I said, seriously, because the guys here on the panel have solved a lot of these problems, or at least are making some headway in solving these problems. We can help you out. Now, to help us help you out, remember there's that tab on your interface which is to ask questions. Please do ask questions, because you've got access to guys that really know what they're talking about today. And we're really interested in Guy, Terry, you really know what you're talking about. I don't know about the other two. And so we're really interested in your experience as well. If you're hearing something and that's exactly what you're experiencing, let us know as well with that. And we'll try and work as much of that in as we can. Also, give us your feedback afterwards. Let us know how we've done on that, because we try and do more of what you like. Now, let's get on with this. Let's get straight into this. And Dale, explain this. Why is it not your grandfather's project management?
Well, I'm not quite a grandfather yet, but I got into project management, I suppose, back in the mid-'80s when I was first went on a project management training course. And what's interesting is if you look at a lot of the sort of textbooks and training material kicking around today, not a lot has changed in terms of some of the core disciplines. I mean, they've kind of moved on, but the basic principles are the same. And what we've got on this little chart here, this little graphic, is just basically to say a lot of what has changed is the context that projects are executed in. So the world has got more complicated. I mean, we've always had complex projects, but generally the world has got more complex, especially around IT centric projects. Whether it's a technology layer or the dependencies between different technology elements, or whether it's just the fact that projects are more inclusive. I mean, gone are days when users would be involved at the beginning of a project. You gather requirements, you go and do the stuff, and then you deliver something back to them, ta-da. Now they're involved all the way along the way, and they're a lot more opinionated than they have.
It's always presented as an advantage, but it's a problem, isn't it? Having users involved all the way and having to be kept involved and not necessarily doing what you tell them to do anymore.
Well, it's interesting. I hear a lot of people talk about IT and the business, but actually when you look at the business is actually just a bunch of people, quite often from different departments, have different ideas, all pulling in different directions, all kinds of different personalities and hang-ups and prejudices. It isn't just one entity. So when a project involves a lot of direct involvement of people from the business, users, stakeholders, managers, execs, it can get quite hairy actually managing all of that.
Terry, are projects harder than they used to be?
Are projects harder than they used to be? Yes, I think they probably are. Especially in my domain, which is IT and technology in general. I think when I first started in project management, I managed my first project in 1976, and I've been in software development, project management, program management ever since, in some way or another. In 1976, projects were normally on mainframes, normally from one supplier, be it IBM or ICL or whoever, one platform, one operating system, one set of software to support that operating system, and basically you knew where to go if something went wrong. Now we've got open source products, we have the internet, we have various different software platforms, various different technologies, all supposedly hanging together, and it really doesn't take very much for that to fall apart. So technically, yes, I think projects are more complex. I think that the business community, the customer, is becoming more less able to deal with any delays and things like that. So there's business imperative on projects that wasn't there before. The business community now likes to dictate the course of events rather than the project team. And so, yeah, probably they are more difficult than they used to be 20 years ago, 30 years ago.
Now, in your job at lastminute.com, Last Minute exists to be able to deliver things extremely quickly to people. Mm-hmm. You can't miss a deadline. Mm-hmm. I always assumed that the project management was done pretty well there. What was it like when you showed up?
Well, I was brought in 3 years ago. I was asked to identify how well we were delivering projects and make improvements. And to be honest, it took me 3 months to find any project delivery capability whatsoever. And I think we were quite able to deliver very small enhancements and bug fixes, but major projects, we didn't have the capacity to do that. And so quite often projects would be delivered late, and sometimes that doesn't matter, but in our environment, if it's late, quite often it's not needed. And so we've spent 3 years trying to make that better, and we think we have. And as I said before we started, I think it took us till about a year ago to get to ground zero on our project management capabilities. So yeah, things are getting better. Hell of a long way to go, but yeah, things are improving. When I started, you know, and I'm not saying it's down to me, I'm just saying as a fact, when I started, our project delivery capacity was extremely poor. But we're improving.
So, Bob, is this typical? Are there a lot of companies now that are just muddling through?
Muddling's probably disgenerous to them, but yes, you know, out there the world is getting more complex. You know, we're in a connected world, so everything's tied together. We've just had a question come through about, you know, how do you handle stakeholders in multiple time zones, countries, cultures, language difficulties?
Yes.
I mean, that's a great example of just how complex we're having to deal with in the world. And it comes back to some things we'll bring out later on in the session, which is this collaboration, this talking, this. If you don't communicate, nothing's going to happen. The great thing I've found when I've run multi-language, multicultural, multi-country projects and programs in the past is that yes in one country may actually mean no in another. And you actually have to sit down and understand exactly the culture of not only the country, but the people around the table you're dealing with. And that's another level of complexity that generally project managers are not trained to deal with. So you're dealing with the culture of another country in that, if you do something in Germany, you will follow a very strict, regimented process generally. If you go and ask that same question, can I have this in the Far East, in the Middle East, the answer will be, of course, yes, because the culture is to say yes.
But that doesn't necessarily mean you're actually going to get it.
Yes.
Right.
That's the difficulty.
Okay. Yes. I mean, what's quickly becoming obvious here, Dale, is that things are far more complicated than just solving things with software.
Oh, yeah. I don't think software has a part to play, but it is a part. It's mostly about people and communication, I think, is a theme that we're going to probably keep coming back to. I mean, just to echo some things Bob was just saying, I've seen a lot of that with big ERP projects that I've been involved in. Yeah. But what's interesting is a few months ago we did some work with the register audience looking at why systems fail. Not so much why projects fail, but why systems fail. And what's interesting is when you look at the root cause of system resilience problems, it's because no one actually thought about what the resilience requirements were and budgeted for that during the project planning phase. And quite often there is this big disconnect between development and operations. Now, I only mention that because these are pretty basic, obvious things
I was about to say
should
that,
actually be captured. But extremely common. So I think whilst we can make comments about the general level of project management, lots of people out there are having problems. So if you're out there feeling a little bit sort of beaten up about things, you're not alone. Is I think one of the messages. But getting back to some of the specifics here. Yeah. I think what one of the I used to do a lot of troubleshooting of stressed projects, and what was quite interesting was a lot of the root causes of projects going wrong was that people didn't have a real clear understanding of why a project was being conducted in the first place. So a bunch of stakeholders might get together and say, we want to do this, but actually when you go through the planning phase, it gets translated into this will be delivered by this date, and you kind of lose a feel for what are some of the real imperatives. So if things aren't delivered by that date, so what? In some cases, as Terry was saying, it may or may not be a problem. In other cases, it
just
might
becomes
be
an arbitrary date at which something has to be done.
Exactly. So understanding the objective side of things and making sure that's properly documented is a pretty important part of it. But also balancing the whole thing from the point of view of 40,000 feet level. It's about balancing the scope of what you're delivering, how much resource, whether that's money, time, skills that you're going to consume, and the time that you're going to deliver it. And, those are three things that you can flex in different ways. There's no right or wrong answer. But the point is that if something has to be dealt with in flight, unless you have a good understanding of your objectives right at the very beginning, how do you know whether you should reduce the time scales, throw a bit more money at it, or reduce the scope to bring these are quite important things.
And also, I mean, in your situation, Terry, those the time that you've got and the resources that you've got and what you're being asked to do, they're not really within your control, are they?
To some extent they are, because you're responsible for putting your plans together. Yeah. Right? And so, if your estimate says these activities require these resources over this amount of time and things like that, then that is within your control in as much as it's your estimate. You own that plan. But at the end of the day, the customer can say, you can't have that. But the key thing then is to communicate what the impact of that is going to be. Right? So, you put your plans together. It requires this much cost, this much time. The customer says no. You tell them what the impact is, and then work through the change.
I don't know if you ever come across this, Terry, but the third box on this slide, about stakeholders, holding their end up, I think, is a good way of putting it. At the beginning of a project, people say, yeah, I'll make these people available from the business to make decisions or help with this when we get to the next level of scoping or design or whatever. Actually, when push comes to shove, they're not available because they're off doing their day job and no one's actually worked that into their calendar and planned it properly, or something has come up which means that they've been pulled off onto something else. And in fact, when you go and do postmortems on projects that have kind of crashed and burned, a lot of the time you do find issues like that coming up.
That the important people have gone missing just because
exactly.
You're in charge and they've got something else to do.
So I think it's easy at the beginning, with the best intentions in the world, if you're a head of department, to say, yeah, I'll make Mary or Fred or whoever available for 2 days a week for that part of the project. But when they're actually needed, you're not going to make them available for whatever reason. Who's responsible for that? There's nothing the project manager can do about that.
This is my life planning these regcasts you're talking about. You guys are never available when I need you. But the serious point behind that, Bob, is that people are very enthusiastic at the beginning. Optimism is at its maximum at the beginning. And we need to somehow manage to not sort of exist on optimism.
And it's the reality check that, we come into this thinking there's a brand new project, everything's new, got a great opportunity to do something fresh and different potentially, and then we sort of start hitting the realities of trying to pull teams together, get individuals together. I think Terry's going to cover it later on, but the real bit is actually getting together with the person you're delivering to and banging out right at the very beginning what that's going to be and what that's going to look like. And then how you're going to keep that going all the way through is the key bit. It's that conversation with the key stakeholder, with whoever's paying the checks, because they shouldn't have any surprises. If they've got surprises, you're going to get depressed very quickly.
Yes. Depression seems to be a theme, and how to avoid it. What's in your hedgehog chart here, Dave?
Well, just to finish off on that, picking up on the communicating with stakeholders thing. Another problem that I've seen quite often is people trying to communicate too much to stakeholders, and I think it's, if you've got an exec who's actually writing a check for the thing, there are certain key things they really need to buy into and be aware of, and certain things you want to report back to them on. But you can see their eyes, if they will give you the time, their eyes glaze over. So I think sometimes you can sort of not lose sight of the wood for the trees, I guess, when you're communicating with execs, and that's not very effective. Detail sometimes gets in the way, I think.
Yeah. So when you're saying detail gets in the way, we've got that question we've got a question that's just come in here about whether project managers can manage projects in areas in which they're not experts. Do you have to know about the thing to manage a project in it? What do you think about that, Terry?
Definitely not. I think, if anything, it's a hindrance. To be an expert,
too much knowledge is a problem.
To be an expert, a subject matter expert in the field in which you're trying to manage a project, in my experience, is more likely to be a hindrance than a benefit. I think there's every logical reason why you should learn enough about your subject area to be able to converse rationally with people that are on the project, including the customer and other stakeholders. But you can miss something if you think you know more about the subject matter than perhaps you need to. And project management should be a generic discipline. It should be transferable to multiple different subject areas. And so, no, in my opinion, you definitely do not need to be an expert in that area to manage a project.
In fact, I've seen some real bad cases of projects under stress when you've had an expert in there and you've actually had a third party, systems integrator or consulting firm actually doing the work. And then you get this kind of not invented here view from the project manager because they believe a thing should be done in this way, and the whole thing falls to pieces because actually at the end of the day these guys are contracted to do a certain thing in a certain way. You should let them get on with those pieces. Yes, you care about the things that matter to you, but having that sort of demarcation is quite important sometimes.
Well, what happens, Bob, when people come to you and say, yeah, but you don't understand how things are done around here? That's the problem, though, isn't it?
I think there is a degree of that, and that is not knowing about your technology. I went from aircraft maintenance, project management, into bank mergers. and I was successful in either one. The reality is understanding what your limits are and learning what you need to learn. I think it's exactly, everybody's saying exactly the same thing. You need to know enough about what's been delivered to be able to talk to the real experts around. You're paying those experts for their knowledge. Mm-hmm. You're not being paid to know more than them. Mm. You've been paid to actually manage their project and deliver for them. Which also there was another question there about do you have to be a business versus a technical project manager? Mm-hmm. Is there a different subset? I think there's a culture appearing of that. I don't personally, I don't agree that it's the right. I think you should be able to deliver projects. We may have certain specialisations in the construction industry where you need certification standards and stuff like that, but the reality is, to deliver good projects, you just need to be a good project manager and learn the tools and tips and tricks of being a good project manager and not necessarily knowing anything else on the outside.
Just a very quick one before we get off this, but I think it's important. Should people be bringing in more specialist project managers to handle their projects then?
No.
I think that's what you were just saying.
I think you need knowledge.
Yeah.
As in specialist, do you mean...
as in someone who's a fully trained, properly experienced project manager, the Terrys of the world, rather than the me's.
I like organisations that are signing up to APM. I've got PMP, PMI certification, like Terry got an MSc. Those type of people, to me, have a grounding in project management and less of a tie to a specific technology or discipline that is nothing to do with project management. So yes, in that answer, I agree with you.
Thanks. Now, Dale, we better move on with this. Tell us about your hedgehog.
Oh, the hedgehog, yeah. But basically, I think a lot of what we've been saying is that there's a lot of things to manage and coordinate. So there's formal aspects of projects, whether it be the reporting side of things, whether it be change management or any of that sort of governance stuff. But also, interestingly, in our research, when we've looked at success and failure of projects, you can measure it in all kinds of different ways, but the amount of it ongoing communication and involvement, and the more directly people are involved in projects out on the customer and business side of the house, the more successful they tend to be, or the less surprises there tend to be. Even interestingly, if there's a delay, that's fine because everyone understood why there was a delay in flight. We're able to adjust things, and when things are finally delivered, everyone's still happy. What the project infrastructure piece is about is just thinking about, well, you've got lots of stuff which you accumulate, lots of things moving around, whether it be transactions, documents, or whatever, and having some kind of mechanism or framework to manage that, which is a combination, usually comes down to a bit of technology and a bit of process. And I think we've listed some of the sort of obvious things that you might look at there. Project management software, content management. I mean, I would argue that actually depends on the scale of your project, but you could probably do without project management in some cases, but you probably couldn't do without some kind of content management. And there's a whole raft of stuff, which I'm sure Bob will pick up in a minute, that you can sort of throw into that mix. But basically a framework of process and technology, which just allows you to manage things. And this isn't the magic dust that ensures the success of a project. It's just basic stuff that if you don't have it in place, it's going to get in the way.
Yes. Bob, pick this up. There seems to be rather a lot of stuff here.
Yeah, well, on Microsoft, so we've got to throw a lot of mud at the wall to sort of get some of it to stick. So what we're trying to say here is organisations, you can have the project server view of the world, but organisations use a lot of technologies out there today that are the foundations and building blocks for good project management. So things like SharePoint, exchange for emails, collaboration. Those build out to give you a solution where you can bring together all aspects of the information flow. And what I mean by information flow is things like we have project schedules being built, we have documents, we've got issues and risks all being gathered together. Well, the first question I generally ask in that is, what's the quality of that data? How good is that data to be trusted to report upwards? So I want to start putting some assurance into that. So standardising everything in one area. I also want to make the information as wide an audience as possible. So whether I'm coming in and looking at it from a stakeholder perspective, or just an interested party, or a third party, or a systems integrator, I can come into one central point where everything is. There is no hidden information. That's pretty key, that I can sort of say at the right level, I can get to the right piece of information, as we've agreed. The other bit is then building your business process to use the tool sets, not the tool sets to use the business process. And that's very important, which goes back to the roles, the training that we talked about in the hedgehog diagram earlier.
Terry, how much of this stuff do you use, of all this Microsoft stack of things?
Well, we are big users of EPM 2010, and 2010 is, in my view, and I'm not trying to sell it, I don't work for Microsoft and unfortunately they don't pay me, but we are big users of EPM 2010. We previously had 2007. I have used EPM 2007 in previous companies. What EPM purports to be, and I know Bob will slightly temper what I say, but it's a collaborative tool. It's a project management tool in as much as it integrates with Microsoft Project. It's now becoming a business intelligence tool, and also what is very important for us is a portfolio analysis tool. Very important for us to use these, but, and I would have said it later, what is important to us and how we see EPM 2010 helping us is principally as a communication tool. It's a communication device, and because it is a communication device, we believe that enables us to reduce complexity. So we have complex pieces of work throughout our portfolio, and we believe that more effective communication builds trust, and building trust reduces complexity. We want to reduce complexity because if complexity isn't managed, your project can quite easily descend into chaos. And if you descend into chaos, the likelihood of you recovering from that is probably quite slim, both in project terms and your career terms.
Does Terry's description, Bob, match what you're thinking about it?
Yes, it is actually. Yeah,
It didn't disagree with you.
It's just historical. We like to disagree. It makes life more interesting. But yeah, that's what it is. It is, that trust that the information's right, the trust that the information's there, and people are seeing the same information. And that's the important thing. I used to work doing similar to Dale, project recovery stuff, and I've worked with project managers who are playing a milestone poker, which is basically, I've got a delivery milestone and there's 3 or 4 of us around the table and we're all waiting for somebody to say I can't make that milestone, and then everybody else around the table collapses and says, well, I'll have to live with that, knowing full well you're not going to be able to deliver anyway. So that milestone poker is absolutely disruptive to a program. So it's how do I make that information more visible, more trusted across the organisation. I'm hoping that's what Terry's supporting on.
Yeah, that's Terry. The question here. Somebody tell me what APM is.
Well, I think Bob's going to cover that in his next slide.
So Bob covered that roughly. EPM is I'll get marketing will shoot me for this, but it's a marketing term for project server and the project server stack.
Enterprise project management.
Enterprise project management. So what does that cover? What's at the top and the bottom of that?
So that's basically starting at the top. We've got access through project web apps. So it's a web app where you're coming in at the very top. From 90+% of the audience. A small number of project professional users. Those are the guys that are actually the people that should be building project plans. Most copies of Microsoft Project are used for viewing. Be used once when somebody says, I built my project, as in they built their project schedule, not their project plan. So Project Server then brings all that information together. It's sitting on SharePoint, it's using Exchange, it's using the collaboration, it's using unified communication. So then I'm constantly in touch with my organisation and my team members and my stakeholders, whether that's global, whether that's local, it doesn't make any difference. And then it's giving you the BI capability that says, I can create simple but effective reporting.
Bob, isn't the real world that a lot of people are doing their project management by making enormous Excel spreadsheets and then printing them out and then passing them around the office?
Yeah, Excel spreadsheets, post-it notes. PowerPoint is one of the key delivery tools I've run across.
How on earth would you use it for that?
Well, you actually can create, as Dale demonstrated earlier today to us in the slide deck, you can create some very Gucci-type things around milestone,
Hedgehog diagram was quite...
Hedgehog diagram was
You like that?
But yeah, that bit that I'm putting information in front of the stakeholder that the stakeholder is expecting, as opposed to, I'm actually, as Terry was talking, putting information in front of the stakeholder that is required.
I think there's a big problem that occurs, though, when you've got those kind of tools, when you're sort of using general office tools or whatever, and that's the whole Chinese whispers thing, because someone actually prepares those reports and they put their own kind of little spin on things, and then they give them to someone else who might pick them up and they'll put their own spin on things. So I think there's a big benefit to having, one of the points of the project infrastructure kind of idea is to try and bypass the Chinese whispers. So it's not that everyone should see everything, but you're all working off the same base of information.
So I don't know if I can add a point there.
Definitely.
And I can only reiterate strongly that I'm not trying to sell anything on behalf of Microsoft, but I think the use of Microsoft Project as a scheduling tool is becoming more and more ubiquitous, to be honest. And it was fairly ubiquitous 5 years ago. It's becoming more so. The difference with EPM, Enterprise Project Management, is that whereas Microsoft Project on its own is a desktop scheduling tool, it doesn't integrate with other people's. You may, perish the thought, one day manage a project and have to develop your own schedule using Microsoft Project. I've got no visibility of that unless I use an enterprise tool such as EPM. Equally, your resources that you may allocate to your schedule, your project, I've got no visibility of their availability any longer. In EPM, there is an enterprise resource pool which shows what every project everybody is allocated to, for how long and to what level of utilization. So purely as a project management scheduling tool, it is much, much more effective than having your own standalone desktop version of Microsoft Project. So although we fundamentally use EPM as a communication device, as a project management scheduling device, in my opinion, it's much more effective than a standalone tool.
Yeah. Dale, there's a question. You mentioned something about documentation, and David's question there is the balance between documentation and doing the work. He says he's seen a project fall over due to overuse of documentation.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think that's another aspect of having the right kind of mechanisms in place, because we mentioned the word communication quite a bit, and I think people very often confuse writing things down and producing reports with actually making progress, which I think is the point being made. And quite often just a simple sort of instant messaging session to say, hey, I've got this, have I understood this correctly? Does this need a change request, or is this just, am I just reading it wrong? And someone say, oh no, yeah, you're reading it wrong. What we really meant was this. That's it, all over it. You don't have to document anything. You don't have to, audit it, have it auditable. Whatever. So I think that sort of just getting things done is something that the right kind of mechanism allows. Coming back to the point about project traditionally being standalone, when I said earlier, having document management kind of capability in place, almost by definition that's shared, is more important than having project software. I remember a lot of people listening to this are probably working for smaller organisations that don't have huge kind of multi-million projects, but they're doing things that are very important to their business. They're quite complex in their own right. So just having a central SharePoint workspace where you're coordinating things, for instance, is much more valuable than the best, prettiest, most detailed schedule in a standalone system.
I noticed we've got a question about that, Rob. Actually, someone's saying that this big pile of software on your on your chart looks like a little bit too much for a smaller company.
And for a lot of small companies, absolutely, I totally agree. And it goes back to what Dale was saying. Often the best value you can get is get the small SharePoint installation in and have all that collaboration, because it's people get very fixated, and this is one of my really annoying things, on building out a very nice Gucci Gantt chart. Mm-hmm. And the Gantt chart is now the project, and it's not.
So once you've got the chart finished, then it's like, oh,
we can go off and do the real job now.
Yeah.
But it's not. It's a snapshot in time of what we believed at that point in time, and unless you keep it up to date, it's actually worthless. In fact, it's probably
worse than useless.
Worse than useless.
Yeah, because
But actually having a central point where we can collaborate, and having even the simplest of things, like just a milestone list that says these are the delivery dates that we are expecting things to come in, and we've signed up to deliver to. It doesn't have to be hugely complex Excel spreadsheets or project schedules. It can be very, very simple things that move things along very, very quickly. So people get very fixated on the Gantt chart. You've got to figure out what is actually going to work in your organisation and what is actually going to be useful in delivery.
So talking about what's going to work in your organisation, let's look at Terry's chart here that you provided. These are some of the lessons that you've learned, Terry. Can you take us through some of them?
Yeah, before I do, can I just refer to a couple of questions here
of course,
about Agile? Because we've got a few questions coming in about Agile as a methodology, and the use of Agile as opposed to Waterfall, the comparisons between Agile and Waterfall. Now, the thing I want to say about that is I'm not sure there is a difference, really. If I look at the Agile Manifesto, or if I look at the characteristics that are required for a project to be worthy of taking an Agile approach to, I'm not sure that there's very much difference between the two things. I don't see there's anything wrong on a Waterfall project for having daily stand-up meetings. I don't think there's anything wrong on a Waterfall project to progressively elaborate your requirements rather than having every I dotted and every T crossed before you start. So there's many characteristics that are inherent in an Agile method that I think can quite easily be used in a Waterfall approach. So maybe there's just one unified method for every project that you do, and you may want to take elements of so-called Agile methods and elements of so-called Waterfall methods, but do whatever it is that gives you the most effective method for that particular project. The one area where I think it's fundamentally different is the notion of self-organisation within an Agile method. I mean, I've been working with developers for a long time, and if you put 3 developers in a room, I'd struggle to believe they could self-organise into a coherent unit. There may be many developers out there who's going to disagree with me. And
if you disagree, please do let us know.
I'm hoping the questions come in, but self-organisation to me requires everybody to have the same self-interest, and that in the human world is very, very rare.
Yeah.
But that's a question of interpretation of self-organisation. If you sort of take it in more of a colloquial sense, and if that group is given a set of stuff that they need to achieve by a particular time, and then you let them work out how they move towards that particular objective. I mean, that's not strictly speaking what's defined from an Agile perspective, methodology-wise, but the spirit is self-organising, I guess. So it depends how literally you take some of these things.
I guess it does. I think the Agile methods tend to take it literally.
Yeah.
And that's probably the problem. And if you don't take it literally, I see no reason why you can't incorporate that type of approach in any other type of methodology. So,
personally, I've seen Agile used as an excuse not to do project management.
Yeah, and that's the danger as well.
What, just to like, we'll just do everything and we'll make it...
We're doing Agile, so we don't actually need to plan this out.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to bang on about Agile, but I can remember when everything was done on the back of a fag packet, and many years were spent trying to get that out of the system. And there is a danger
With Agile, we just put that all back in again and make it respectable by giving it a name. Yeah.
I'm not saying that the elements of the method aren't right or wrong, but the work, the project should justify it really, the characteristics.
I think Agile can fit very nicely within any methodology. I think it can be well delivered. Personally, we use that inside Microsoft for our own project management, inside our own project management methodologies. The key is, as Terry was saying, is actually understanding what the person is meaning by Agile and what you're actually going to deliver. It's agreeing what you're going to deliver, when it's going to be delivered, and then we're now into something we can manage.
Because those things don't get thrown out when you remove some of the structure. Yeah. Now, if you disagree with this, please do let us know, because before we let you go, Terry, we have to deal with that if people disagree with you. Now, tell me about some of your experience from this. This is kind of like your distilled wisdom, isn't it?
Yeah, sort of. If only I had some. I managed my first project in 1976. I'm not banging on about that. I'm just stating a fact. So I've been involved in project management for a long time, and to be honest, I empathise and sympathise with anybody that is managing projects. And so for the last 10 years probably, I've been trying to do what it takes to make the life of a project manager easier, because I don't think it is that easy. I think project management is one of the most difficult jobs out there. It's an almost unique mixture of management and leadership, which you very rarely come across in any profession. And by management, I mean making sure that you do things in the right way. And by leadership, I mean making sure you do the right things. There's very few jobs for which there is such a mix of leadership and management. So when I was asked to join lastminute.com 3 years ago, just over 3 years ago, I was asked to transform the project delivery capability within the technology group. Lastminute.com is fundamentally a marketing and technology company. There are support parts of the organisation, but fundamentally that's what lastminute.com is. Technology groups across the world, in Bangalore, Delhi, Buenos Aires, in Singapore, New Zealand, Italy, Germany, Stockholm, France, Spain. So it's a challenge to collaborate across that wide global area. So I'm not going to talk about what we did. I'm going to talk about a little bit about what we learned during the course of that time. So if I look at the project management view and the customer view, particularly in a failing project, I would get almost consistent responses from any project manager I talk to on a failing project. So the project manager will say, I'm very well qualified. I've got certification, I've got 15 years of experience, I've been successful before. And yet I'm working on a project that appears to be failing. They will say that the reason why it's failing is because the requirements haven't been properly defined, there's not enough money, we're under too much pressure, the timescales have been imposed. Everything is the fault of the customer. If I speak to the customer, on the other hand, they will say, I was persuaded that I should improve the way we deliver projects. It's cost me a lot of money to improve our maturity across the organisation. I was persuaded we needed very, very skillful project managers, which, by the way, cost a lot of money, as you all know. And what am I getting? I'm getting a project that's failing. And to be honest, I blame the project manager. I blame the project manager because it's over budget. Everything I get is late. The quality is poor. I don't know what's going on. So you get two completely different points of view, and the point is, both points of view are correct. And the reason they're both correct, they're both looking at the same thing, but from a completely different viewpoint. And that viewpoint, the only way to bridge that gap is through an exchange of information, i.e. communication. So what I'm talking about here fundamentally is the need for the project manager to communicate with the customer. if you look at the top of the slide, you'll see how many projects. This is a survey of software development projects. So this survey is done by Standish, and is a very, very well respected survey. I've used it many times to justify improvements in project management. So this says that 32%, this is the 2009 survey, the latest one. 32% of projects are successful, 44 are challenged, and 24% of projects fail. Well, that's pretty damning. 24% of projects fail is pretty damning. I've always thought it was pretty damning. But the more I look into it, the more I think about it, actually, is it right? You know, is a project that gets cancelled due to non-viability a genuine failure? You as a project manager may be highlighted as a project manager that has worked on a project that's failed because it's been cancelled. To my view, if you cancel a project that is no longer viable, quite often for reasons that are totally unrelated to the progress of the project or the performance of the project, if you cancel that project or involved in the cancellation of that project, if it's non-viable, that is a success. Too many projects limp on past the point at which they are no longer viable.
And so, Terry, you're saying that they limp on just because we associate failure with cancellation?
Because we associate failure with cancellation, absolutely, but also because nobody takes the time and trouble to assess whether a project is viable during the execution of the project. Normally, I'm sure people do. And so, as a project manager and as a customer, actually, you become emotionally wedded to this project continuing. And to be honest, it's a cultural thing where, people have got to be made to understand that it's nothing wrong with cancelling a project. But when Standish says that's a failure, that goes into the psyche, and suddenly the culture, is changing. And at the other end of the spectrum, we talk about successful projects, on time, on budget, and fully functional. Now, I don't know what that means either, because, if what does on budget mean? Does it mean that if you spend £1 more than you were given as a budget to manage, that your project isn't successful? And maybe it's, or maybe you've been given some tolerance. And, if you spend £1 more than your tolerance, does that mean your project isn't successful? I don't think so. I wouldn't regard that as a non-successful project. And what about if the project costs half of what you had budgeted for? There's the notion of opportunity cost that's been lost, locking in those very valuable and scarce resources into a project that actually didn't need them all. So the point I'm making is this: I'm not agreeing anymore with the Standish definition of what constitutes success and failure. In fact, I don't believe it is a binary option. I think that every project has a degree of success and every project has a degree of failure, and the art is to increase the amount that a project is successful and decrease the amount in which it fails.
Terry, there's an example I came across a few years ago. I was refereeing between a systems integrator who was implementing an ERP system for a customer or with a customer. And the interesting aspect of the dispute was a contract had been signed, a scope had been signed off. The systems integrator was sitting one side of the table saying, we delivered exactly what we agreed we would deliver at the beginning. And the customer was saying, yeah, but it should have been obvious when this happened that was no longer what we needed.
The argument that's been placed to me in a legal setting when I've been in that environment is, you're the experts. You should know that isn't what I needed. Right? And actually, there is no argument for that. There's no argument you can put forward to defend yourself. You are the experts in this field. You've been brought in because you're the experts. You're being paid a lot of money because you're the experts. Just because I said I wanted X, you should have known I wanted Y. And
interesting to know where that kind of project fits on the Standish.
Well, it's fully functional, right? You've delivered a fully functional project because you've met all the requirements, but you haven't given the customer what they want.
Do you think it makes sense to think of projects almost as a sort of the scope of a project as a living thing. I mean, that's a bit of a glamorous term, but it's dynamic. It can change.
We deal a lot with projects as if they're like machines that we start working, and then and it's and a lot of the language around it. But it's one of the things you're saying, they're fundamentally human based.
Yeah, fundamentally, a project is a human based system. And the only thing about a project actually that is complex, in my opinion, this is all my opinion, by the way. I don't suggest that I've got a monopoly on being right. I'm just giving you my opinion. The only thing that introduces complexity into a project is the human element. Now, we all know, we've heard it said so many times before, if it wasn't for the people on this project, we'd be okay, right? But that has solidified in my mind as being the root cause of complexity on projects is the human project network, if you like. And bigger projects look like they become more complex because they're getting bigger. Actually, in my view, they're becoming more complex because they've got more people involved. And that communication network, the more people you've got, increases exponentially. And you cannot predict human behaviour in the same way that you can predict a project method. So the process on the method should be scalable. It should be repeatable. If you keep doing the same thing, you should get the same output. Human behaviour is not like that. It's non-linear and complex. And so the key is to manage in that complexity before it descends into a chaotic situation. And I think that's done by communication.
Now, what's this long, hard slog to the beach? I want to get onto that because I thought that was interesting.
Well, we've been talking a lot about methods. We've been talking a lot about processes, procedures, standards, practices that have to be in place to make your project successful. Well, yeah, that's right. They probably do. But the thing to remember is this. I think that all projects require control mechanisms. I don't think there's any doubt about that. But in my opinion, again, I don't think you should introduce control mechanisms on your project, or indeed in the wider organisation, which prevent or inhibit the flow of value through your project. And so what you have to do as a project manager is make sure that the control mechanisms that you put in place do not prevent value from coming out of your project. Now, we've spoken about Agile versus Waterfall, Prince 2 versus PMI, APM. Well, they're all different tool sets. Look at your project. You might want some nails out of that toolbox and some screws out of that one. You don't have to use Prince 2 as your method and stick to it religiously. Take some Agile approaches. Whatever works for this project that you're trying desperately to deliver, use it. Use whatever works. And my contention is this, that once you do the hard work to make sure that the project environment is going to work and is going to make the flow of value through your project seamless, then it looks like you're on the beach. It should look like you're on the beach. It should look like your presence is not necessary. And then what you do is you've got time to concentrate on the things that matter, which, quite frankly, is communication. So that's what that means. It's hard work getting to that point, but focus on what being on the beach means, and try and work towards it. Focus on the project environment.
Okay, now I'm going to move us on to the next slide, because we've only got about 5 minutes left, Terry, and we've got a bunch of questions for you. So one of the ones that I was interested in, well, we've been talking about all these methodologies, and in training and certification in these methodologies, is it a useful way to tell apart the skills that people bring to it, or is it just a way to sift CVs?
My view? I don't think it does any harm whatsoever to become certified. That's my view. It doesn't make you a project manager. And so, I've interviewed and appointed many project managers in my time, and yeah, it may be a qualifying factor. I certainly wouldn't reject somebody that wasn't certified, and I certainly wouldn't recruit somebody that was certified over somebody that wasn't, simply because they were certified. However, I would say as a project manager, there is nothing wrong with being certified in any type of project management discipline, as long as you don't think it's a Bible.
Well, what's your opinion?
Well, from a Microsoft side, internally within Microsoft, within our IT organisation, all our project managers have to become PMP under PMI. So they all have to become project management professionals. If you don't manage that within a set period of time, if you're not one when you become a project manager, then the role will move, or you will move from the role. So we see it as a building block. Does it make a good project manager? I'm with Terry. It's the individual that makes it, but it does show you've invested time and energy and got the building blocks together. The same as methodologies. I don't care what methodology you use, as long as you're consistent in your use of that methodology. Microsoft View.
Don't cheat when it gets difficult.
Don't cheat when it gets difficult.
Dale, there's a question here talking about someone having to work with a large management consultancy, clouding projects with documents. The input of outsiders can be helpful, but it can hold things up, can't it?
Yeah, it can. I think it really comes right back to knowing what's important and focusing on key issues, key deliverables when you're actually conversing, because it's easy. I mean, what's the most common defence mechanism when something is going wrong is to bamboozle the client with detail, and so you just got to say, you've got to identify what those key elements are that are really, really important up front, and just keep coming back to them. And in my experience, if you just that principle alone can help you manage third-party involvement.
Can help to simplify and clarify things quite a bit, can't it?
It's right. It doesn't matter what you say about that. You can give me all documents in the world. We're still not going to deliver this at this time in this way, are we? Well, no.
Is that how it works for you, Terry? Do you have to keep coming back to one or two very simple things?
Well, it depends what the project is. I think you've got to do whatever's required for any given project. You shouldn't waste time doing things that aren't required, and that applies to documentation the same as everything else. You might have a project in a small company working in an agile type way which doesn't require very much documentation at all, and but on the other hand you might be developing a new drug or a new aeroplane which may very well require a degree of documentation. So I think the question is to make sure that you only do what's necessary. And that's a tough thing to ask of people. Identify what it is that's necessary, but only do what's necessary, no waste.
Is this how you deal with scope creep? That's another question.
Scope creep, you deal with it. You have a change management system that, that takes change requests in and works through what the impact is, reports it, and if everybody's happy with that impact, you include it in your scope.
But then you don't have scope creep.
But if you just try to satisfy everything,
you have scope creep. You've got to manage it. Often people come and they say this project's got out of control because we're asking. The stakeholder keeps asking. Actually, it's not the stakeholder. It's the stakeholder minions, or it's the other parts of the organisation that want to get on your project, and they're just asking and asking. The reality is, what does the stakeholder want? And if the stakeholder says it's X, not X squared, then you deliver X. And that's the hard bit for project managers to get their head round. It's the same as there's a great one up there about cancelling projects, as Terry was saying. It's a hard discussion to have. Absolutely. It's a career one. It could be a career limited discussion to have. But it's better to be involved with something that the organisation says you can point to and say, we did the right thing, than end of a year later, 6 months later, be a millstone round your neck of a totally failed project and everybody on it blackened.
It just doesn't feel like the right thing when you have to have that conversation today.
It's a hard thing. Project managers are paid to make hard decisions. Sometimes we don't want to make them, but we've got to do them.
Okay. With that, we are basically out of time, guys, I'm afraid. We've had a load of questions, and we hope that we've covered most of them. If there are some that deserve an answer, then Bob, you can stay behind and answer the questions, can't you? you can do it. Bob or Terry, or Dale, or whoever's available. I won't answer the question. Don't believe anything I say. Thank you very much for taking part in this, and thanks for all the questions. There's some really good ones. We hope you found it useful. Give us your feedback. And please come along to our next Regcast. It's not very far in the future. So, thank you very much. My name's been Tim Phillips, and from the Register, goodbye.